Namaskar, Nilesh here with another session of Shraddha and Pradnya. Let's begin with the question I received a while ago. The question, I will read it on the next page, but if I have to summarize it, I will say, broadly, the question can be summarized as why Grand Saraswati of Rigved is not the Saraswati of Ramayana or Mahabharata. And in my response, I am going to refer to a specific epoch, and that's 22,000 BCE, which is more than 24,000 years ago. So keep that in mind. That's going to be the answer. Almost think of this as a transition in the Itihasa of River Saraswati, in its status as a Grand Saraswati, in its status as the way it is described in Rigved versus the way it is described in Ramayana and Mahabharata. All right, so let's get to the question. This is coming from Mind Reader. If you recall, in previous sessions of this Shraddha and Pradnya series, I think I discussed one or two questions from this same individual. Actually, he has asked one more question, and if time permits, I will also do another session on it. So total of 4 questions that he had asked, and they all are good questions. So let's go with this one. He writes, sir, any river with 1 or 2 kilometer width can have super floods and can cause huge destruction and is considered huge compared to human size. Okay, I'm not sure why he's comparing a river with a human size, but I think what he means is for a human being, whether the river is 1-2 kilometer wide or 8 kilometer wide, I mean, it's still a big river. And I agree with that. Not that long ago, I think 2020, now, as a number of you would know, the Yamuna is kind of shrinking, in terms of its water quantity and whatnot, unless it is in a flood state. I was in Agra for one of the lecture series, and we just drove by Yamuna. And at some point, I was just wondering what is the width of Yamuna? It's like 1.5, possibly 2 kilometers there. And still it feels grand, right, in terms of its width. So yeah, I mean, I understand what he's saying. Let's get to the next paragraph. So how do I interpret that the Saraswati river talked about in Rigved is not during Ramayana or Mahabharata time, but much earlier than that? So the second part, he is referring to my assertion, which I have made in many places. You can refer to, just type the word Nilesh Oak and Saraswati, and sometime you may have to play with the different spelling, Sarswati, but also Sarsvati. But Nilesh Oak and Saraswati, if you type, you are going to get talks in multiple places. My channel, Nilesh Oak, but also Sangam Talks, Sattology, and many others. Jaipur Dialogues, and so on. So yes, and also in my books, okay, I have asserted that the Saraswati of Rigved is, in terms of its grandness, is not the Saraswati of Ramayana and Mahabharata times. And so mind reader is asking, why do I say that? On what basis? What is the evidence? And this is what I am going to answer here. These are not the exclusive or exhaustive references from Saraswati, but they are some of the key references from Saraswati, from Rigved, of Saraswati from Rigved. And I would encourage all of you to get hold of these references. There are 10 different ways to get hold of these references. Okay, since there are multiple references, I'll not spend time describing them to you. Simple one is just Google and type River Saraswati, and once you start reading, more than likely you will get the entry to Wikipedia, and start referring to the cross references. Start referring to all the references anytime something is described about River Saraswati. Of course, the very critical, important disclaimer about Wikipedia, I always say Wikipedia because you are usually going to get some entry, at least a starting point. You have to be extremely careful in what you trust on Wikipedia, especially as it relates to the Indian civilization. Most of it is so controlled, okay, by the editors and sub-editors and the contributors and all anti-India, breaking India elements, by dogmatic elements, by anti-scientific elements, by elements who pretend to be scientists but actually are exactly opposite of logic or science. So you have to take this with certain amount of caution, actually a huge amount of caution. But for simple references, like where it is particular reference in Rigveda, actually provides us a great resource. Anyways, there are 10, 20 other resources there. Just start somewhere if you are curious. Otherwise, go with the Shraddha here, guys. Okay. So, for example, when I say that the Saraswati of Rigveda is not the Saraswati of Ramayana and Mahabharata, just keep that in mind. River Saraswati existed in Rigvedic times. River Saraswati existed in the Ramayana times. We are talking in the terms of a itihasa, a historical perspective from a chronology perspective. River Saraswati existed in Rigvedic times. River Saraswati existed in Ramayana times. River Saraswati existed in Mahabharata times. Very likely, River Saraswati also existed in post-Mahabharata times. River Saraswati does not exist today. Now, why do I say that? Because you will find some people who will refer to Ghaggar Hakra River, and will say, well, that's a Saraswati. Why are you saying Saraswati doesn't exist today? All right, the Saraswati, the way it is described in Rigveda, Ramayana, Mahabharata, does not exist today. You can take it like that. Now, the Ghaggar Hakra is no longer a perennial river, but even if it was a perennial, it's still missing many features that are described into the descriptions of River Saraswati in Rigveda, Ramayana, and Mahabharata. But let's start with Rigveda. In fact, we are only going to look at the Rigveda because that's the distinction. To answer a mind reader's question, it is just not that River Saraswati is considered as a grand river or a big river or a mighty river in Rigveda and said something otherwise in Ramayana and Mahabharata. Well, actually it is. But most important point to know or note down from a Rigvedic descriptions is the fact that Rigveda shows awareness for all the big rivers, especially of, you can say, northern India and northwest India. In spite of that awareness, Rigveda describes River Saraswati in many different ways. Remember, these are suktas. The idea behind these suktas is not to talk about River Saraswati from a geology, hydrodynamics, hydrology, geophysics perspective. It's a coincidental information that we are lucky to have. But even there, the message of Rigveda, the descriptions of River Saraswati in Rigveda are consistent. And what are they saying? In spite of the fact that Rigveda shows awareness for the rivers from Ganga, Yamuna, at least from Ganga to the east, okay, all the way to Yamuna, now all the way to the rivers in the northwest area, now what we would consider Afghanistan, for example. It shows awareness, and still in a consistent fashion, it talks about river Saraswati as the grandest river. Ambitame, if you go to Rigved Mandal 2, which is one of the oldest mandal. Now, again, that's a different, see, anytime it's a hyperlink. Now, oh, why is it oldest? Well, I would say it's not like a one perfect book I can tell you and say, hey, read that and everything written there is perfect. But we have to almost go for the best approximation. And I would suggest a book by Bhagavad on Rigveda analysis, Rigveda, analysis by Sri Srikant Talagiriji. Okay, where with a lot of good data, not that everything is 100% correct, but directionally he appears to be correct based on all the evidence that has been presented by him, and at least 3 different elements that I have studied. I have not found a time to write about them. There are actually potentially 7+ different elements by which it can be studied further that I don't think even Srikant Talagiriji has studied, or even I have studied. I have referred to 3 additional ones, but even my study remains rudimentary. But it remains, but the study that I have done, at least as a Swarthanuman, for my own satisfaction, tells me that directionally he's on the right track, which is to say, relatively speaking, broadly speaking, if you have to do the relative chronology of the suktas of these 10 mandalas, you can say the oldest one appear to be predominantly in mandala 6, 3, 7, 4, 2, 5, 8, 9, and then a long gap, and then mandala 10. And of course, the suktas of mandala 1 come from very old, very ancient to relatively new in the context of Rigveda. Why am I saying all of this? The sequence is important. Okay, so this, for example, comes in mandala 2, which is what? 6, 3, 7, 4, 2. So out of 10 mandalas, this is like, comes during the first 5 mandalas. You can also say this about, look at the other references, mandala number 6 and mandala number 7, which is what I have quoted here. So again, let's go back to the relative mandala sequence. The oldest one is what? 6, 3, 7, 5, 6, 3, 7, 4, 2. So everything that I'm showing you on the screen is part of the first 5 mandalas, the oldest 5 mandalas, you can say. Just a quick note on these mandala business and the relative chronology. This is not to say that some very recent sukta, again by recent I mean in the context of Rigveda, okay, only Rigvedic times, okay, some recent sukta can be part of the oldest mandala, like say 637, but predominantly these are from older times. That's all it means. So there is a mix. Vyasadeva, 7,500 years ago, at the time of Mahabharat war, that's 6th millennium BCE, did rearrange the existing suktas, existing Vedas, okay, in a form that is, possibly much more easy to handle, whatever was his purpose 7,500 years ago. So he did reorganize them, recast them in some form. So these things would have happened. That's how mandala 1 has very latest sukta to very oldest sukta. Okay, sukta. But my point is 637, remember those numbers, mandala 6, 3, 7. So out of that first 3 mandalas, 6 and 7 is here. And then 4, 2. And out of those next 2 mandalas, 2 is here. Now, what are these saying? These mandalas saying when the descriptions of river Saraswati show up? The mandala number 2, Sukta 41. I'm just taking few lines from there. Ambitame, Naditame, Devitame, Saraswati, Aprashasta, Ivasmasmi, on and on. Okay, you can read those, read the translations. It's saying the grandest of the grand river, Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame, Saraswati. Or if you come to mandala 6, the entire Saraswati Sukta, you can call it. Okay, you can see how it is one of the grandest river, what it is doing, how fast it is moving, how it is cutting the tops of the rocks, just like somebody cuts the lotus flowers from its stem, that easily it's cutting. Not only that, it's almost carrying those stone, the tops of the mountains along with its water. The water is that huge and that grand and that powerful and forceful and so on. If you go to Mandala 7, again, you can look at these descriptions of Saraswati. Okay. Now keep this in mind, because I am going to contrast this with Nadi Sukta from the last mandal of Rigveda, that is from 10th mandal, 10.75. Okay, so here is a grand river Saraswati. Now let's quickly look at what happened to Saraswati. How old is Saraswati? Let's begin there. How old is Saraswati? We actually do not know. It's very important to understand. Actually, we do not know how old is Saraswati. It could be going back to millions of years, for all it matters. We can talk about only the evidence that we have. Now, that is not to say just because we don't have evidence, it did not exist, but in an authoritative fashion, in a fashion with some evidence to back it up, we will not able to talk about it. So somebody asked me, like, did river Saraswati existed before 172,000 BC? I would say very likely, yeah, it existed. Oh, where is the evidence? I would say I don't have it. Now somebody says, oh, are you claiming that river Saraswati existed that around 172,000 BC? Yes. I'm not just claiming, I'm asserting, which means it is backed by evidence. Okay, this is a very recent paper, 2020, from, I remember one of the authors, James Blinkhorn, where they have shown river Saraswati flowing around Bikaner area. Now, people who neither understand science nor understand logic, haven't done anything original, have not studied anything with the acumen that's required, any subject, okay, full of doubts, careless, casual, time wasters, not familiar with archaeology, but blindly stuck in archaeology. I mean, this kind of questions I get when I go on lecture tour, lecture series in the audience. And, there is an element of innocence that you kind of appreciate. You say, okay, people have not known. But what do you mean not known? Somebody like a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old, and not known, meaning you have a curiosity, but you have not even bothered to understand any of it. And then the kind of arrogance that sometimes people show when asking a question is really amazing. I mean, it's enjoyable in some sense. Anyways, so the reason I'm just digressing on this point is, like, people have this very naive, childish, actually children ask very intelligent questions, by the way. They are very sharp with their logic and scientific acumen. That's my experience. Right from age 6 and 7, I have seen that, okay? So when I'm using the word childish, I'm using the word childish in a normal sense that people use. Hey, don't be childish, don't do that childish thing. But really, it's not fair to the children. Okay, it's the adults who ask this childish question, or they have an assumption in their mind. When they think of evidence, they're almost looking for a board, a signboard, some kind of engravings on a rock saying River Saraswati flew here, okay, during these years or these many thousand years ago. That's utterly stupid, utterly nonsensical. And occasionally we do get epigraphs, okay, but I would say most of the epigraphs that around the world for anything that we have found, we meaning the whole world has found, there will be some exceptions, but they don't go beyond, say, 5,000 years. Okay, just I'm using a crude number. Don't go anything beyond 5,000. So if somebody has an extremely idiotic, naive, childish assumption that there has to be some epigraph which clearly states at the archaeological evidence site that here was a river Saraswati flowing, just like we go to a museum and the board is written, then that's utterly stupid. Okay, so people have to come out of that. Okay, it's interesting to actually go to some of the sites where the research is being done or the excavations have been made and look at how the data is actually collected and how we have to interpret the data. Back to this 172,000 BC, James Blinkhorn paper, I think around 2020, maybe 2019, showed evidence of a grand river, big river flowing near Bikaner. And based on the hydrology maps or morphodynamics of rivers maps from geology, geophysics, satellite images, and all that work that has gone over last, say, 100+ years, we can say with the confidence, we can assert with confidence that yes, that's a river Saraswati. Then we have geological, geophysics, geochemistry, morphodynamics evidence that also tells us something else. That sometime around 70,000 BCE, think of this as a reference point, the timing of Toba explosion. Something happened, and we don't know what it is, but it appears that the river, that river, I'm going to call it Saraswati, river shifted to further north and further west, so some geographical things. Again, when I say something happened, we can always conjecture, actually there is evidence in support of it, but you know what, that will be another long digression. So I'll skip that. I'll encourage you to study on your own. But what we do know as a fact, okay, whether people understand the causes of it or not, is that around 70,000 years ago, there was a shift of this river from where it was, say, think of this area as near Bikaner, to further north and further west, to think of it, imagine as an area of the Punjab and then the Rajasthan border to Kalibanga and that area. Okay, so that happened around 70,000 BCE. Now, throughout this time, there is this river Saraswati coming from the Kurukshetra area. Actually, there are 5 rivers there, okay, Ogavati and many others there. So that area, so river Saraswati is connected with the Kurukshetra, okay, and further north of Kurukshetra, which is also Kurukshetra, by the way, not far from Yamuna river also. Those rivers, so that's how the name is attained. But guess what? The grandness of river Saraswati is because of 2 other prominent rivers. One is Shatudri or modern day Satluj, and the other one is Yamuna. So Satluj is coming from, you can think of this as a east, north, and coming southward and meeting Saraswati from the Kurukshetra area. And Yamuna is coming from the again from the north side, but from the, let's not call north, let's call it east side, and then the southern side, and meeting Saraswati. That was the scenario 172,000 years ago, could be even before that. I mean, has to be before that. We just don't have evidence one way or the other. And even in 70,000 BC, even when the shift is occurring, still these rivers are feeding their waters into river Saraswati. That's what made river Saraswati the grandest river of Rigveda. Now let's go further and see what happened. Something happened around 50,000 BCE. Now there are enough papers, okay, enough research works, which very consistently demonstrate that river Yamuna separated from river Saraswati after 50,000 BCE. So remember, from 172,000 and now fast forward to 70,000 BC, there is a shift to further northwest, Kalibanga. But in that place, this thing continues 70,000 BC through, say, 50,000 BCE. Yamuna, Satluj, they are all feeding their waters to Saraswati. Therefore, they are the tributaries, of river Saraswati. You can call them tributaries. Now, between 50,000 and 40,000 BCE, you can just literally go and type in Google, and type the right words, separation of Yamuna from Saraswati. Of course, you're going to get some totally fake claims, but then it's up to you to actually go deeper. You just don't read something and just say, oh, but yeah, I read somewhere. No, that's utterly lazy and tamasic. You read something, just go, okay, where is that source? What kind of evidence was provided by that person? And just don't stop there. Somebody says, yeah, actually, he provided some research paper as evidence. Well, did you open that research paper? Did you get a copy of it? Did you actually look for the reference? And even did you read the cross references? Today, I was doing something on the genetics related to the Sumerians. Of course, we have talked about the Bhagavad from Iraq. This is what? Mahabharata Times, right? And before that also, it's a Prague Jyotishpur. But I was trying to look at the genetics evidence for human beings, but also for domesticated animals and few other things. And there is so much evidence that is already there. More evidence is popping up from these different fields, basically supporting my assertion. My assertion was an indirect assertion on the indirect evidence that the people of Sumeria, or what we call Sumerians, or then Babylonians and Akkadians, Chaldeans. I mean, these are the different names given to folks in the Iraq area, that the Tigris-Euphrates area. Again, these names comes because of a very, I would say, not a very efficient, somewhat defective, but we have to give a benefit of doubt, the style of nominating or nomenclature for a certain archaeological civilizational dig that the Western Europeans decided how they do it. So, for example, if they dig something in Atlanta today, and they find some archaeological evidence of some ancient civilization, they're going to call it Atlanta civilization, and that sometimes creates a confusion. Oh, Atlanta. So Atlanta was there 40,000 years ago, and that can start the confusion. Anyways, so I was studying in the context of the genetic evidence for animals, but for human beings and other type of evidence. And all the evidence is pointing basically, in my Swarthanuman, I'm convinced, but Pararthanuman, I'll wait to get more evidence, is that these were Indians who, or people of an Indian descent, who is, I mean, genetically speaking, who moved into that area of Iraq post-Mahabharata. Even there is evidence for post-Ramayana, but even just post-Mahabharata, because that's where the whole Western Europe is stuck on the beginning of civilization and agriculture. So when we show this, actually that whole dogma of the Proto-Indo-European and all, I mean, all that, the way they have posed it, that nonsense is falling, has fallen. Only really the issue is our people are so I don't know what to say, so dumb, so lazy that, they will not do anything of their own. And for those few people who are doing the work, they will ask lazily the question, but I heard the Aryan invasion is true. And that's kind of nonsense. Now, some people do it just deliberately to provoke likes of us, that we know how to handle. But it's really painful when people who are otherwise sincere, but out of their sheer laziness, continue to ask similar questions. Anyways, there is sufficient evidence to show that Yamuna separated from Saraswati between 50,000 BC and 40,000 BC. But something else I must add here. There is, of course, the river's paths keeps on changing. But there is a huge fakery within the Indian research circles. These are not anti-India or breaking India forces. These are supposedly pretentiously pro-India forces who are, for whatever reasons and without any basis, without any evidence, are stuck into claiming that somehow Yamuna separated from Saraswati. Do you know when? Only 5,000 years ago, 2700 BCE. Okay, so if you do that, you add 2,000, that gives you 4,700. So therefore, I said only 5,000 years ago. You will see this in some of the books by pro-India Saraswati researchers that you would not imagine in any way they are to be considered anti-India or breaking India, and I don't think they are. But it's extremely careless, casual, and lazy type of claim, and a dangerous claim. There is not even a shred of evidence for Yamuna separating from river Saraswati 5,000 years ago. Just as if like they forgot one zero, guys, 50,000 BC, 40,000 BC versus 5,000 and not even 5000 BC, 5000 years ago, like 3000 BC. I fail to understand why they do that. I fail to understand their laziness as to why they don't go and look for the evidence. In fact, why did they put those kind of statements in their books in the first place? I have tried to follow up with them asking for a specific evidence, like show me what happened. Where is that evidence in 2700 BC, plus minus whatever, 300, 500 years? That shows, yes, Saraswati split from Yamuna, or rather Yamuna split from Saraswati. And no, again, the typical thing that you will see in the Mahabharata dating circles, digression, going on a tangent, okay, like scoffing, okay, just, I mean, everyone knows, or all scholars know, and some kind of total crap. Okay, that will be thrown at you. And of course, I mean, this is all voluntary stuff. I mean, if the guy is pretending to be a slave, there is no point, wasting time with that person. Okay, but therefore, all of us, you cannot leave it to the few researchers, and you cannot just blindly trust anyone, including myself. You have to, somebody who feels a bit more passionate has to go at least 2 steps. Some people will go 2 steps, other people will go 10 steps, and others will go 20 steps, but that is required. Otherwise, you'll just be, looking at the tennis match where you don't understand a damn thing about the tennis, just looking what's happening, and you are clueless what's happening. One person is hitting from this side, and other person is hitting from that side. This is true when it comes to Saraswati research. When it comes to Mahabharata dating research. It's true for Ramayana dating research, Rigveda dating research, the nonsense of Proto-Indo-European language, the status of Saraswati, Sushruta, who gave what to who, is the India the foundation of not only language and not only civilization, but even the astronomy to the rest of the world, or Greeks gave it to India? Unless we stay just lazy and just look at it as a two-way match going on with no skin in the game, this will continue. All right, enough of rant. Okay, the went off, back to this. There is enough research papers to show that the Yamuna separated from Saraswati between 50,000 BC and 40,000 BC. So one significant source of water into Saraswati is gone at that time. So yes, it is still grand, but not as grand as it was before 50,000 BCE. Okay, let's go further. Now another significant thing happened 15,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, 13,000 BC plus minus 500. Now, plus minus 500 is just the nature of error. Okay, now error is like a standard error. It's a statistical term. It's not like that people are uncertain. This is just the nature of the kind of evidence that we gather. Some point I will talk about this. Okay, why that error shows up and what does that mean, and how it is not to be confused like some Indic researchers have done. Okay, and I'll talk about that when the time is right. Okay, so the second big event that happened 15,000 years ago, so Yamuna has gone 50,000 years ago. Now, in about 15,000 years ago, Shutudri, which is modern day Satluj, which was coming straight south and meeting Saraswati, for whatever reasons, geological, geophysical, that kind of reasons, suddenly it turned sharp westward and started flowing westward, no longer feeding its water to river Saraswati. And after this, essentially the Saraswati is still grand, like what Mind Reader asked, like, is this still a big river? Yeah, absolutely. But it's no longer the grandest river. No longer the grandest river, Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame, Saraswati, as described in Rigveda. Okay, so now, of course, after this time, so just to put that 15,000, I'm going to show you. So today is where we are. The horizontal line is the axis of time. Today is where we are, 21st century. 0 is the somewhat arbitrary, but somewhat contextualized with either Jesus Christ or with Julius Caesar, 45 BCE, the calendar that we use. Julian calendar modified to Gregorian calendar in 1582. Julian calendar is assumed to have began in 45 BC. And remember, these are somewhat arbitrary, but agreed upon starting points, okay, from the Western world. And that's fine. I mean, we have done the similar thing in Indian calendar. I'll talk about that some other time. 3102 BCE. 3102 BCE as a beginning of a calendrical epoch has nothing to do with the history, nothing to do with the history in the sense of Mahabharata and Ramayana. But that is what the confusion we have. About that some other day. So we have today 21st century, you go back 2000 years, that's an arbitrary reference point connected with Julius Caesar 45 BCE or with a Jesus Christ like 0. That's how that Jesus 0 comes. Then they realize how bad was their calendar about 13th century. Then, but it still took them 200 plus years 300 plus years to finally make the change 1582 into a Gregorian calendar. Well, just let's not blame them. How nutty and how dogmatic we are. Okay, sometime I'll talk about how long we are carrying with us a extremely wrong, faulty, irritating for many reasons, the dogmatic concept of a Kali Yuga. The Kali Yuga that everyone almost feels so damn confident and cocky that it began in 3102 BC. It is actually a Panchanga reference point, a calendrical reference point, not any different than Julian calendar beginning in 45 BC. We don't ask the question, why 45 BC? Well, Julius Caesar was there at that time. And he said, let's begin a calendar, let's do some calendrical reformations. And then what about the 0 point? Well, 0 point is the Council of Nicaea, the Christian, whoever, Bhaktalog, philosophers, they came together and they said, oh, we should start counting time from the birth of our Lord. Now, nobody knew the birth of Jesus, okay? In fact, there is a humor which says 0 supposed to mean the birth year of Jesus, right? And there is a humor in the Western world among the researchers. They say, well, the Jesus was born in 480, 4 years after 0. Well, then why call that 0? Some humor, by the way. And this is not what you can say. This is not, I'm not putting down either Julius Caesar or the timing. In fact, what I'm saying is these are arbitrary, yet a starting point decided by some kind of consensus. Okay, for practical purposes, we do that. As a control point, we say, forget everything else. If we are starting some partnership, forget the past loans and debt and everything. Let's start like from 0 today. And today's day is what? Like 7th of November. It's arbitrary, but it's very useful. All right, so that's 0, that's going back 2,000 years. From that point, we measure this going back to 5,000, 10,000, 15,000. Those are 5,000 BC, 10,000 BC, 15,000 BC. Now let's bring the history, itihasa, okay, a chronology of the developments of river Saraswati from 172,000 to 50,000 to 15,000 years ago. Okay, 13,000 BC to this time. So what does it tell you? Somewhere from here, okay, and then something happened in 22,000 BC, which I did not even describe. Okay, that has to do with the peak of something we call LGM, last glacial maximum. Worldwide, kind of, the cooling of the temperature. That doesn't mean everyone was freezing and shivering. India was actually a beautiful place. Civilization was thriving like no other place. Okay, amazing. But because of the overall cooling of the planet, you can say, or significant parts of the world, there was a lot of water, and water is the same amount of water on the earth, was stuck into glaciers, okay, stuck into ice form. And therefore, the flow into the rivers went down to the extent all our rivers of India were also affected. And that is seen around to 22,000 BC into geology, geophysics, geochemistry, hydrology, morphodynamics of rivers data. So you see that as the time when the rivers really shrunk in some fashion, okay, or started shrinking in a distinct way. That is that 22,000 BC or 24,000 BC. We know that after that, river Saraswati was not the grand river. Therefore, we say we can go before 24,000 years for definitely some portions of Rigveda. That's how I drew that conclusion. But fast forward and come to 13,000 BCE. So where would 13,000 BCE be? So this is 12,000 BCE, the timing of Ramayana. 13,000 BC would be somewhere here. And guess what? That's when river Satluj suddenly took a sharp, if it's coming from the top, from the north, you can say sharp right turn, like going westward in 13,000 BCE. What is interesting? That Satluj, which was otherwise flowing straight and coming down to Saraswati, has taken a sharp right turn, and now it is flowing westward. That westward flowing of Satluj river is described in Ramayana that happened in 13 millennium BC, 12,209 BC. What does that tell you? It's relatively, of course, a fresh memory in the writer of Ramayana, like Maharishi Valmiki's mind. Okay, it is encoded. So that in fact, it gives us a upper limit of 13,000 BCE or 15,000 years ago on Ramayana. Ramayana cannot occur more than 15,000 years ago, based on that reference. Based on the reference that Yamuna split from Saraswati and started meeting Ganga after 50,000 BCE, we get another upper reference. Ramayana definitely did not happen in more than 15,000 years ago. So we really don't need to go. But if you are looking for additional evidence, yes, there is. Ramayana did not happen anytime before 50,000 years ago, 50,000 BCE. Why do I say that? Because Ramayana describes multiple times Yamuna meeting Ganga. And that only happened after 50,000 BC. It happened only in the last 52,000 years. It did not happen before. So why would Ramayana write Yamuna meeting Ganga? It writes because it happened only in the last 50,000 years. That's how we draw the conclusion. So remember, there is that some reference from Ramayana. There is some geological data, empirical scientific data that is coming. We have to process that data intellectually. We have to process that data logically, bring the points together to bring a conclusion like this. But back to river Saraswati. So by the time river Saraswati comes, I'm saying the time axis comes to the 13 millennium BC, the timing of Ramayana. Notice, what is that Saraswati that you look at? Yamuna has already separated from Saraswati. Satluj has already separated from Saraswati. That is the Saraswati, still a great river, still fast-moving river. That is what Ramayana describes. But then I said, that's not the grand river of Rigveda. Why? Because the river of Saraswati of Ramayana times is no longer fed by Yamuna and by Satluj. Now, what happens is, just like we have these tributaries, many rivers coming and merging. In case of Ganga, Alakananda and Bhagirathi, and they just all coming together, and many other rivers joining, right? Same thing was happening to Saraswati. But just like there are tributaries, there are also distributaries. For example, in case of Yamuna, we know that Yamuna kind of split. In fact, Rupa Bhattiji has done a wonderful research. Yamuna, in the sense of like a plural, like there are two, and why it was seen like two sisters and so on. You can read her blogs or listen to her talks on Saptology. That also, there is a sufficient geological evidence in support of that. So, but simple answer for here, the Yamuna also split, like when it's going there, some portion of Yamuna, actually that's Drishadvati, that was coming from there and meeting Saraswati, even in the Mahabharata times. Okay, so yes, the distributaries can form because that land, if you notice, is pretty flat. Okay, and with a flood, the rivers easily change paths. That happens for all those rivers, all rivers around the world. And so that was happening. The bottom line is the grand river Saraswati of Rigveda is no longer that grand by the time you come to Ramayana times and Mahabharata times. In fact, over time, what's happening is, as the distributaries are also moving away, the Saraswati is getting smaller and smaller. And therefore, by this time, after Ramayana, at the time of Ramayana, and this is just a speculation, guys, because we don't have any evidence in support of it, other than the fact Saraswati is now getting smaller and smaller. Okay. Vinashan, the place where Saraswati kind of disappeared, practical purposes, is formed. And then the location of Vinashan would have moved over time as Saraswati got dried further. Okay. So that Vinashan could have been formed just before Ramayana, could be after Ramayana, but definitely long before Mahabharata. And the actual location of Vinashan, where Saraswati kind of disappears in some fashion, would have moved up up along the path of Saraswati as the different geological forces took place. Okay, now what something else happens. So Saraswati is actually going down, from what beginning somewhere 22,000 BC because of the effect of last glacial maximum. Then 15,000 years ago, 13,000 BC, Satluj leaves Saraswati. So that's another shock to Saraswati, if you want to think it like that. So from them, it's a downhill journey. But something else happened, and I don't have a data here, but watch my Saraswati talks elsewhere, or many of my Mahabharat dating talks elsewhere, like paper of Anindya Sarkars. And guys, I can give you these details, but you know what? You have to go and watch my papers, read my books, okay? Because the references are there. Something else happened from a climatology perspective. Okay, that's also archaeology. Geology is archaeology. Hydrology is archaeology. Morphodynamics of rivers is archaeology. Okay, rivers changing path and we noticing the evidence is archaeology. Okay, this is also important for really the dumb archaeologists who think pots and pans is only archaeology. Pots and pan is archaeology, but pots and pans is not the only thing that is archaeology. Okay, so now what happens? Somewhere between 7,000 BCE to 4,500 BCE. So think of this as around the time of Mahabharata, about say 2,000 years before Mahabharata, and something that lasted, say 1,000 years after Mahabharata. Okay, it's a period of about like a 2,500, 3,000 year period. There was, again, we'll not go into the reasons, not everything is known why that happened, but there was an intensification of monsoon. Okay, the southwestern, the Nairutya monsoon. Okay, southwesterly monsoon. And that led to rejuvenation of river Saraswati. And that can be beautifully found, validated, corroborated from 100 plus descriptions of river Saraswati, okay, from the Mahabharata text. River Saraswati is in flux at the time of Mahabharata. In some places, it is flowing beautifully. Other places, it has gone under the sand. Some other places, it's flowing below the sand. Some other places, against its previous track, you can say, it's coming out of the sand. And some places, it has completely disappeared. Okay, so it is in flux. It is in all different states. And those all different descriptions are there in the Mahabharata. 100 plus descriptions of river Saraswati. That's how rich the evidence of river Saraswati is in the Mahabharata text. Now, remember, right in the Mahabharata, for example, Balaram describes it, and whoever is narrating describes during the Tirtha Yatra of a Balaram that Saraswati this place has disappeared. I mean, Balaram begins his Tirtha Yatra of Saraswati from the place called Vinashan. He visits the place called Vinashan where Saraswati has gone inside the sand and has disappeared. Balaram has also visited the places during his Saraswati Tirtha Yatra where they could detect from the vegetation on the surface that Saraswati is flowing under the sand. And then he has visited places, I don't want to say the name because I might say the wrong name, Chamaso, there is one Tirtha Kshetra, or some other place where he sees Saraswati going inside the sand. And then in some places he's seeing Saraswati with plentiful of water, just taking a turn eastward and so on. And so a magnificent sight. So we have all these different layers of Saraswati right during the Mahabharata times, because Saraswati has started drying long back. about 15,000 years before the time of Mahabharat war. Then it has gone through up and down, including many downs, such as Satluj leaving Saraswati 15,000 years ago, 13,000 BCE. And then there was a younger Dryas when actually the temperatures fell down significantly, which means again the water would have become locked into ice and glaciers and so on, which means the flow might have gone down substantially, which kind of you see into the Brahmana text, like a Vinashan being formed. But Saraswati also experienced rejuvenation because of the intensification of monsoon around this 7,500 years somewhere here up to 4,500 BCE. And after that, there was a very sharp decline and a quick drying of river Saraswati around 4,500 BC, possibly 3,000 BC. But what we can tell definitely is by 2000 BC, Saraswati was gone. Okay, so that's that. Now, two more points. We discuss the grand descriptions of river Saraswati from the oldest mandala of Rigveda. For example, 6, 7, and 2. I think that's what we discussed. Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame, Saraswati, Saraswati flowing like horses. I'll not repeat all those descriptions, capable of cutting the mountain tops and making them float on its waters and speedily taking them away and so on. In fact, that information, the different types of crystals, that mountain stone crystals that it brings, they act like a signature of each river. And that's how these particular conclusions are made that I shared with you so far. But let's fast forward to the 10th mandal, the last mandal of Rigveda. Nadi Sukta. Okay, many people just will read, will get very excited, which they should, and how the rivers are beautifully mentioned. There are some utterly, I don't know, foolish people in academia, okay, just because they do not want to accept a brown guy contributing to the world knowledge, world civilization, the brown civilization, you can say, the Indian civilization. They just have done atrocious nonsense, total speculations, calling it academic freedom and all BS, trying to say Saraswati is in Afghanistan, okay, or Iran. Well, there are rivers names which people have taken from Saraswati as they migrated outwards, and some of them might have settled there. And in memory, they called that Saraswati, that became Haravati and Helmand and whatnot. That's utter nonsense. And why I'm saying utter nonsense? Because there is no proof for that. In fact, there is a proof against that stupidity, which is given right here, Rigved Mandals 10.75. Nadi Sukta. Most of you would have heard about it, but many of you would have just seen these lines, felt very blissful, which, hey, you have every right to, and rightfully so. But many simply do not bother to read rest of it. Yes, it is a Nadi Sukta. Sindhu Kshita, okay, at the top. Remember, Sindhu is the word used in a proper noun for a river Sindhu, but many times it's also used general, like in the sense of Saindhava, which is what forms the Saindhava, therefore the ocean or the river, and so on and so forth. Okay, all right. If you come down to this here, Richa number 5 and further. Imam me Gange Yamune Saraswati Shutudri Stoma Sachata Parushna, and then all the Asikra, Marudvade, Vitasta, blah 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 blah. I mean, these are all names of the rivers, by the way. I'm just saying blah blah blah. Sushomaya, okay, and these are Rasaya, Shvetya, Sindhu, Gubaya, Gomati, Krumu. These are all different rivers. What is important of them, I'm going to put an arrow, I think I have it. Look at the sequence. It's going from the east to the northwest, right? So Ganga, Yamuna, the Saraswati is not here, but Saraswati was here in between area. Remember this, I don't know if you can see it, the Shutudri turning sharp right in the 90-degree angle is somewhere here. So you see, this is river Satluj. Now there is a dam built here these days, but anyway, that's coming here. And this is Ropar or Rupanagar in Punjab. And before 13,000 BC, this river, I don't know if you can see this line used to come down here. Okay, and this is the area of a river Saraswati. But in 13,000 BC, it turned sharp westward and then started flowing like this, eventually meeting Sindhu. Okay, then meeting other rivers and eventually meeting Sindhu. Why do I want to tell you that? I want you to understand that from this Nadi Sukta. Now, Nadi Sukta is not specifically stating that, oh, so Satluj turned westward and met Sindhu. But what is it saying? Imam Te Gange, you will see all these 19 rivers are mentioned. And by the way, the names that you see, some of the names, of course, modern day, they are different, but Vipasa, Parushni, Askini, Vitasta, they have a different name like a Zelam and whatnot these days. But if you go further, Sushomna and Gomati and Kubha and all those names that you see here, they are mentioned there. Now, these days, they might have some slightly different names, but we'll not go into that. The identification is very certain. Nobody objects it, not even the Western Indologist. Okay, and if they object, that is their problem, not our problem. Okay, they have to catch up with us, guys. Okay, so anyways, so important point is, after describing these 19 rivers, if you pay attention, in fact, not just there, right from the beginning, if you pay attention, what you are going to find is that, yes, it is a Nadi Sukta, but in this Sukta, river Sindhu, now pay attention, river Sindhu is described as the grand river, as the grandest river. That is the sense of it. I mean, it's not some sense in the way I have to twist and torture this Sukta to pull that interpretation. No, you can read any translations, and do read 4 or 5 different translations of this Nadi Sukta. Okay, Sindhu is the big river. Now, this is very important. This is there right in the Rigveda. That no longer Saraswati is the big river, grandest river, but Sindhu has become a grandest river. Now, this is where Rigveda Mandala 10. Now come back and understand where or when possibly this got added. Remember, nobody again disagrees, and it is there in the Mahabharata text, that Vyasadeva recasted, re-edited the Vedas, Rigveda and other Vedas. So we have a reason to say that it is at some point this Sukta describing, and it doesn't have to be like 7,500 years ago, it could be slightly before that, but it was part of that edited version by Vyasadeva of Vedas 7,500 years ago at the time of Mahabharata. That's when this Sukta, or before it came, but it became part of the Rigveda, where it is saying Sindhu is the grandest river. So the transition from Saraswati as the grandest river to Sindhu as the grandest river has actually happened in the so-called Rigvedic times. We will talk about another times why so-called Rigvedic times. Because, again, this Western Indology and with their lackeys, and actually all of us, totally lazy people, including myself, well, I didn't do it, but I had to read that stupidity, which is to say, oh, well, there were Vedic times, and then there was a Puranic times, and then there was a Brahmana times, and there was then an epic time. Utter nonsense. We still have a Vedic age with us. If we make use of Vedas, if we study Vedas, if we are performing something out of Vedas in the modern form, it's still with us. It's not like there was one specific date, somebody put a board there saying, hey, from this day, no more Vedic age. Now it is a Ramayana age. Nothing like that. Utter nonsense. But that has been fed in our lazy brains, okay, which we need to get rid of in a hurry. Now, can I do that tomorrow? No. Now, lazy people will continue to do it, but that's my message. You need to do it now. The first time you hear it, go do whatever it takes. Read the right stuff. Look at the empirical evidence. Get rid of that nonsense, as if there was one Vedic age and then there was some Brahmana age and something like this. No. It's like saying you have a car that you're driving for a long time, but sometime the manuals came, car manuals came. Well, I mean, in principle, like, people might have thought the car invention happened, and some people said, you know what, it would be a good idea to give a supporting information manual. So yeah, that might have taken a 200 years, and not even 200 years, 20 years or something. That's possible. But essentially, the car manual is essentially what? Goes in parallel with the car manufacturing or somebody possessing a car. Same thing, the Brahmana Grantha or the Upanishad. That's what they will say. The Upanishad came after Brahman, and that after that came these, and then the Puranas. No, that's utter nonsense. These things coexisted. They existed in a different forms because, it's like if there is a car and it needs a fuel, then and therefore the repair shops would be there somewhere. The person might do it himself, that's possible, but the science of repair needs to be there. A repair manual needs to be there. Somebody must be there to supply the parts. Somebody must be there to supply the fuel. Therefore the refinery must exist. The transportation must exist. A gas station must exist in some form where you can purchase the fuel, if nothing else. Okay, a car manual will exist. A car seller would exist. A car manufacturing plant would exist. Just like these things all have to exist together. That's the same thing with having a samvita, like having the ruchas or the original Veda, then the Brahmanas, then Upanishad. These are all together. Now, there can be a evolution and development of each of them. Well, that's exactly what has happened. Like, there is no reason to think that the Rigveda Nadi Sukta 10.75 is from 100,000 years ago. How can it be? In order for 10.75 to be valid, empirically valid, like what Shankaracharya says, if the Shruti says the fire is cold, even if Shruti says it, we cannot accept it. Jnanam na purusha tantram kintu vastu tantram. There are many things, majority of the things that we can understand with our empirical senses. They are to be understood with empirical senses. They are not to be taken on a blind faith. Now, there are some things, there are some things that say what happens after death. Okay, what happens to the Atma before a baby is being born? Now, those are the things we don't have. Our science and technology has not sophisticated enough to test those. Then we use different techniques, indirect techniques, yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, and great sages, doing meditation and contemplation. And we just take their word as a praman because we have no alternative. But when we have alternative ways, such as this, such as now phenomenal geological hydrology evidence, we can clearly understand that this sukta, Nadi Sukta, would have come into being in the last, say, 24,000 years. Before that, Saraswati was the grandest river. And now Sindhu is the grandest river. That is what the description is. Okay. So here we will say Sindhu is the grandest river. So even back to mind reader's question, like when I say, oh, the Rigveda Saraswati versus Ramayana Mahabharata Saraswati, since this is in Rigveda also, although the last part of Rigveda, even Rigveda is acknowledging the change of status of river Saraswati as the grandest river and transitioning it. Think of this as a passing the baton, as if to river Sindhu. And that is captured here. I would tell you guys, I came across Rigveda as a serious student. Of course, I was trying to study and I gave up many times because I didn't get the right help that was required then. But my study of Rigveda is not that old. Okay, although I'm reading about Rigveda and trying to study Rigveda, but as a serious researcher, it began in 2016. Okay, and someone like Professor Balram Singh ji is a witness to that. Okay, it started with River Saraswati International River Saraswati Conference. That is the context. I went deep into it. What shocked and surprised to me is that many Rigvedic researchers have not understood, comprehended this point of the transition of Grand Saraswati the transition of Grand Saraswati to Grand Sindhu, which is there in this particular sukta. Very critical. I mean, I started 2016, which is what? End of 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, like 6 years now. Okay. If you pay attention, guys, you can find so many insights. Now, this is not to put anyone down. Actually, I'm sitting on the shoulders of these great giants of last many hundred and thousand years in an Indian tradition. Even the Western Indologists, in my other talk the other day, somewhere I just mentioned, when I criticize Western Indologists because of the deliberate distortions they create, but in no way I ever doubt their tenacity. No way I ever doubt their willingness and ability to do tapasya. Once they get into the subject, it is just amazing to what level of detail they will go and extract the material. Very rarely we will see that in our contemporary researchers on the pro-India side. Very rare, by the way. Okay, so it's no way when I criticize them, it's a criticization to us, criticism of a specific point. It's not a wholesale criticism. It's not throwing the baby with the bathwater. All right. So back to my what is it? Mind reader's question. So there is a transition right inside Rigveda, but hopefully it's clear in what way I say the Saraswati of Ramayana is not same as Saraswati of Rigveda, especially the older portions of Rigveda, older times of Rigveda. Saraswati of Mahabharata is not the Saraswati of Rigveda. But if you take the Nadi Sukta, then yeah, I have no problem saying that, hey, that Saraswati described here, possibly, not many descriptions. In fact, the descriptions of Sindhu, this one will agree. I mean, this description, I would say, perfectly agrees with definitely the descriptions of Saraswati of Mahabharat times. The only change there is Saraswati has been rejuvenated due to intensification of monsoon. Possibly this description may agree with the Saraswati of Ramayana times. Because remember, Shatudri or Satlaj has already moved away from Saraswati before Ramayana. Okay, 13,000 BC, 15,000 years ago, and Ramayana is about 14,000 years ago. I think I'm done. I would have gone long, but guys, that's how it is. Okay, if you get bored, watch it in few parts. You can speed up the speed of how you want to listen to it. But you know what? This also I created sort of reluctantly, but there's another thing. Many people said, when I'm sharing and showing the diagrams, but many people listen to my YouTube talks, even the previous ones, like with Sangam talks and Sathology, when they're driving. So they also want the space is slow so that they can focus on the road also. and I have to take into account that they may not have the luxury of seeing the diagrams and the pictures and so on. Any case, quick summary. Saraswati was the grandest river of Bharatvarsha definitely until 22,000 BC, but this is also a transition point. Okay, Yamuna separated from Saraswati after 50,000, so about 50,000, 40,000. Now, why 22,000? Just to repeat the point, this is because of another phenomenon, a climatological phenomenon known as last glacial maximum. Okay, the cooler temperatures where a lot of water is locked into the ice and in glaciers. Okay, and that's why all our north rivers are fed by the Himalayas. Okay, the Himalaya glaciers. Now, people sometimes comment on my pronunciation. Guys, when you live for more number of years of your life in America, and then you are dealing with people speaking 15 languages, 15 different languages. I'm not talking the 15 languages of India, but other languages of the world through your business and so on. It becomes a mess, in your brain, like how you pronounce words. I'll tell you, even the English, how you pronounce a certain word in Texas is very different than how you pronounce it in Boston. Okay, so things like that also happen. The reason I said that is just because I said Himalaya. Okay, so Himalaya, somebody sometime I think said to me in a comment, like, Nilesh, you should say Himalaya. Why are you not saying Himalaya? Can you not say it? Oh, of course I can say it, Himalaya. For example, when I give, since many lectures I give in face-to-face to students and universities and whatnot here, if I say Himalaya, many will just go, oh, okay, now what is that? But if I say Himalaya, then they say, oh, okay, yeah, the Himalayas, okay, I know that, the greatest mountains, Mount Everest. So sometime the way I will pronounce is possibly like that. I speak fast. I do not always enunciate the words properly, okay, possibly with my dental structure. That's one. And you know what? There are too many thoughts going on in my head. So while I'm even talking to you, and that's just me, guys, you have to accept it, accept me as I am. At my age, not many changes are possibly possible. But that's actually what's going on. There are too many things, like, I have to finish this and I have to go and do some work, and I don't want somebody to open my study door, a family member. And how do I do that? And what other works? Unfortunately, while I was doing this, there were 3 phone calls coming in, and I had to ignore, but still watch who was calling for different reasons, because I manage my own different things, what is going on. Anyways, so the last glacial maximum is the reason where water was frozen in Himalayas. Okay. And therefore, the water flow into all these rivers of the Northwest, right from Ganga all the way to the rivers of Afghanistan, it went down. And that is seen into geological and hydrological and morphodynamics evidence. Okay, that's so amazing. Anyways, Yamuna separated after 50,000. Ramayana cannot happen before 50,000, no matter how much blind Shraddha you want to stick and just take some Puranic reference and make a fool of yourself. Okay, don't is my advice, but if you still choose to do it, don't waste my time. Okay. So Ramayana is also not possible before 15,000 years ago, that is before 13,000 BC, because Satluj is described as the river flowing in the west direction, which is only possible after 13,000 BC, and so on. All right. The next thing that happened is Satluj separated from Saraswati 13,000 BCE. Vinashan, I'm saying very likely, this is a contribution of Rupa Bhattiji, by the way. Okay, that the formation of a Vinashan, that she said, she and I have discussed it. She is a very original researcher. Okay, so Vinashan possibly formed, and she said this based on her study of Brahmana Grantha, Gopat Brahman and Taittiriya Brahman and many other Brahmana Grantha. Brahman has not to confuse with the Varna Brahman Kshatriya Vaishya Shudra. This is a type of a genre of a grantha, you can say. It's a manual. It's like a car manual, equivalent to a car manual. It's a yajna manual. Okay. So that's her contribution. Even she has said, and this could be right, that possibility of a existence, creation, or the existence of a Vinashan as early as 22,000 BCE. Okay, because of LGM itself too, this could have happened. And then the place might have been rejuvenated, the water might have reappeared, and the location might have shifted, and so on. Anyways, Vinashan was formed sometime after 13,000 BCE, but to her point, Rupa Bhattiji's point, it could be as early as 22,000 BCE. And she has significant evidence in support of what she is asserting, by the way. The location of Vinashan very likely moved upward along the path of Saraswati over the next millenniums. Ramayana, as we know, around 12,200 BCE. Rama Janma, 12,240 BCE. This month is a month of November. 29th November, 12,240 BCE is when Rama was born, using Julian calendar as a reference calendar, extrapolated, extended into antiquity. The calendar didn't exist before 45 BCE, but we are using the same rules of that Julian calendar and extending it backwards. Okay, then the date comes is 29th November, 12,240 BC, Rama Janma. Then 12,223 is when he left for a Vanvas. Then 12,209 is when the Yuddha happened. 12,006 January, 12,208 is when he killed Ravan. And he returned to Ayodhya finally on 13th January, 12,208. So about 13 millennium, 14,000 years ago. That's where Ramayana. So now you know the situation of, or the status of river Saraswati by the time of Ramayana. It's distinctly different than how it was as described in the oldest mandalas of Rigveda. Intensification of monsoon rejuvenated Saraswati between 7,000 BC and 4,500 BC, correct? Okay, that's why you see all these beautiful descriptions with lots of water in parts of Saraswati during the Mahabharata times, and therefore in the Mahabharata text. This is also the time of Mahabharata, of course, you know that. Post 4500 BC, Saraswati rapidly dried. It could have been gone by 4500 BC, maybe by 3000 BC. We don't know exactly. Definitely it was gone by 2000 BC. Okay. All right, that's it, guys. This was another long session, but hey, you know what to do with it. You have to also become expert along with me in efficiently listening to some of the talks. As I might have said this, I can if effectively, efficiently listen to many of the other talks that I listen to on the YouTube. Sometime a hour-long presentation, if I'm familiar with the subject matter, I actually do it in 20 minutes. I just say what they're talking. Oh, I know this. I know this. I ensure that I didn't miss some important piece, but I fast forward. Okay, I increase the speed. So use all these latest techniques, or latest gadgets or latest flexibility when you listen to these presentations. All right, I'll stop here. Please write your questions, write your comments, and I'll see you soon in another session of Shraddha and Pradnya. Namaskar.